History is often defined as a set of lies agreed upon, and some of those lies have been repeated so often they've become gospel. From horned Vikings who never actually wore them, to a French queen who never mentioned cake, we've been fed a steady diet of historical fiction disguised as fact. Today, we are debunking 15 of the biggest falsehoods in history that everyone still believes, stripping away the legend to find the much weirder truth beneath. 1. Viking horned helmets. If you picture a Viking, you're almost certainly seeing a rugged warrior with giant cow horns sticking out of his head. In reality, there is zero archaeological evidence that Vikings ever wore horned helmets into battle. This fashion myth was actually invented by 19th-century costume designers for Wagner's opera The Ring of the Nibelung. Practical Vikings knew that horns would just give their enemies a convenient handle to grab during a fight or get snagged on the rigging of their longships. 2. Napoleon's height. The Napoleon complex is named after the idea that the French emperor was a tiny, angry man overcompensating for his stature. However, Napoleon was actually about 5'7", which was slightly above average for a Frenchman at the turn of the 19th century. The confusion came from a difference between French and British inches, combined with relentless British wartime propaganda that depicted him as Little Boney. He wasn't short, he just had a very effective British PR team working against him for 20 years. 3. Let them eat cake. Marie Antoinette is the ultimate villain of the French Revolution because she supposedly told starving peasants to eat expensive brioche if they didn't have bread. There is absolutely no record of her ever saying this. The quote appeared in the autobiographical Confessions of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, attributed to a great princess, and was written when Marie was only 9 years old and living in Austria. She was a convenient scapegoat for a revolution that needed a punchy, elitist soundbite to justify the guillotine. 4. Columbus and the flat Earth. You were likely taught that Christopher Columbus had to prove the Earth was round to a skeptical Spanish court of flat earthers. In truth, every educated European in 1492 knew the Earth was a sphere. The ancient Greeks had proven it 2,000 years earlier. The real argument was about the size of the ocean. Columbus's critics were actually right. He thought the world was much smaller than it was, and he only survived his journey because he accidentally bumped into a continent he didn't know existed. 5. The Library of Alexandria's Single Fire. The story goes that a single catastrophic fire set by Julius Caesar, or a religious mob, destroyed the sum total of human knowledge, setting humanity back centuries. In reality, the library suffered a slow, agonizing decline over hundreds of years due to budget cuts, lack of maintenance, and several smaller fires. It didn't vanish in one dramatic night, it simply faded away because the city stopped paying the librarians. It's less of a cinematic tragedy and more of a cautionary tale about underfunding public services. 6. George Washington and the Cherry Tree. We love the story of a young Washington cutting down a cherry tree and admitting it because he cannot tell a lie. This entire episode was fabricated by a biographer named Mason Locke Weems shortly after Washington's death to provide a moral lesson for children. Washington was a great general and a capable leader, but he was also a politician who was perfectly capable of a strategic fib. The cherry tree story is ironically a complete lie told to praise a man for his honesty. 7. Nero fiddling while Rome burned. The image of the mad Emperor Nero playing his fiddle while the Great Fire of Rome consumed the city in 64 AD is iconic. One major problem, the fiddle wasn't invented for another 1,000 years. Most historians agree that Nero wasn't even in Rome when the fire started. He was at his villa in Antium. When he heard the news, he actually rushed back to the city to coordinate the relief effort and opened his gardens to provide shelter for the homeless. He was a lot of things, but an arsonist musician wasn't one of them. 8. Ninjas wearing black. We all know ninjas as shadows in black pajamas and face masks. However, a real ninja's greatest skill was inpo, the art of hiding in plain sight. Dressing in a black bodysuit would have been a death sentence in feudal Japan because it would immediately identify you as a spy. They actually dressed as farmers, merchants, or monks to blend into the crowd. The black outfit actually comes from Japanese puppet theater, where the stagehands wore black to signify they were invisible to the audience, a visual shorthand that Westerners took way too literally.
9. Iron Maidens. Museums across the globe once displayed these upright coffins lined with spikes as evidence of medieval cruelty. In truth, Iron Maidens are a 19th-century hoax. They were pieced together from various artifacts by showmen to create torture museums for curious tourists. No records from the Middle Ages ever mention their use, and the most famous one, the Nuremberg Maiden, was actually built in 1867. It turns out the medieval era was plenty dark without us needing to invent extra spike-filled cabinets. 10. Einstein failing math. It's a comforting thought for struggling students. Albert Einstein, the world's greatest genius, failed math in school. Except he didn't. Einstein had mastered differential and integral calculus by the age of 15. The myth likely started because he failed an entrance exam for a polytechnic school in Zurich. But even then, he passed the math and physics sections, he just failed the botany and French parts. If you're looking for an excuse for your C- in algebra, you'll have to find a different scientist to blame. 11. Lady Godiva's naked ride. Legend says Lady Godiva rode naked through the streets of Coventry to protest her husband's oppressive taxes. While Godiva was a real person, the story of the naked ride didn't appear in writing until nearly 200 years after her death. Medieval chroniclers loved adding a bit of scandal to pious figures to keep their readers interested. In reality, she was a wealthy landowner and philanthropist, and if she did protest taxes, she almost certainly did it while wearing a very expensive and respectable silk dress. 12. Gladiators fighting to the death. Hollywood teaches us that every gladiator match ended with a throat being slit after a thumbs down from the crowd. In truth, gladiators were expensive investments for their owners, similar to modern professional athletes. Most matches were highly regulated and didn't end in death. A referee would stop the fight when one man was wounded. Killing a star gladiator was like a football coach executing his starting quarterback after a loss. It was a terrible business decision that happened far less often than we think.
13. The Wild West. We imagine the American frontier as a lawless land of daily gunfights at high noon. Statistically, western towns like Dodge City and Tombstone were actually safer than modern-day New York or Chicago. Most towns had incredibly strict gun control laws that required visitors to check their weapons at the sheriff's office upon entry. The shootout was a rarity that was usually fueled by alcohol and bad aim, rather than quick-draw skill. Most pioneers were more worried about dying of dysentery than being gunned down in the street. 14. The primitive Maya. We often think of the ancient Maya as a small, primitive jungle society that lived in isolated pockets until they mysteriously vanished. In reality, recent LiDAR technology has revealed that the Maya lived in a massive, interconnected megalopolis of over 60,000 structures, complete with complex highways, advanced irrigation, and industrial-scale farming that supported millions more people than we ever imagined. They didn't just disappear either. They abandoned their cities due to environmental stress and political shifts, but their descendants are still very much alive and well today. It turns out the only thing primitive about the Maya was our own limited ability to see through the trees. 15. Chained slaves built the pyramids. For centuries, we've believed the Great Pyramids were built by thousands of Jewish slaves under the lash of Egyptian pharaohs. Archaeological evidence, including the graves of the workers themselves, tells a different story. The pyramids were actually built by a paid labor force of thousands of skilled workers and seasonal farmers. They were fed prime cuts of meat, provided with medical care, and were buried in honorable tombs near the pyramids they helped build. It wasn't slave labor, it was a massive ancient public works project that functioned more like a national duty. The past is a messy place, and the stories we tell about it are often designed to make it more exciting, more moral, or just easier to digest. The next time you hear a perfect historical anecdote, remember that the truth is usually hidden behind a thick layer of 19th-century PR and operatic costume design. See you next time, assuming we don't find out the internet isn't just a very elaborate prank.